Hello and welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Jim Rugg.
I'm Ed Piskor.
Looking at a classic of modern comics with Jeff Smith's Bone today, Ed. But before we dive into this all-ages masterpiece, what's new?
How about a contemporary all-ages comic? Red Room is coming out in May. That means we have to send this thing off to print after April 20th. That's when the final orders have to be in for this thing. Get it put onto your pull list. Murder on the Dark Web for fun and profit. So you see how it fits in with the pedigree of Jeff Smith comics.
Kind of like a rat creature, a little bit.
Yeah. I'm sure they do some evisceration and whatnot. There are tens of thousands of people who've put in the pre-orders for this comic already. Get yours while it's hot. Get yours before it's printed because my stuff always sells out pretty early. Here are some of the variant covers to go along with this first issue. That's the Eddie P variant, Jim Rugg, by way of Dan Clow's 8-Ball Issue 1 variant, Peach Momoko, and there are several shops across the country that ordered 1,000 copies, and they're getting exclusive covers. Some of them have an interesting model where they're waiting until final order cutoff to release their thing, so there'll be more news on that later. But it's going to be a monthly comic. It's going to be a horror comic. I have about 6-7 issues done already, man, so it should be coming out pretty reliably. Hit up my link tree in the description below. You can pre-order through Fantagraphics, all of that stuff.
You can follow me on patreon.com/JimRugg. My latest updates have been continuing my Street Angels dog and Street Angel Lost Dog comparisons. Kind of moving into this home stretch now as these stories deviate from one another and then kind of dovetail back together as we get near the end of Act 3. The other recent post that I have put up is a collection of my how-to books, my shelf of how-to-make comics books, working on an essay for something. So a lot of what I do on Patreon is just put up works in progress. Basically, whatever I'm looking at, thinking about, or working on finds its way on there, barring the big book of the moment. So you can find all of that and more, lots of original art and downloadable out-of-print PDFs of my mini comics and zines at patreon.com/JimRugg.
So Jim, that was not lost on me. He is working on a big book, so it's narrowed down a little bit.
Yeah, and by big, maybe long-term project is a better way to describe that. But we are here today, Ed, to talk about Jeff Smith's Bone, one of the very successful creator-owned, self-published titles in the history of American comics. Starts out in 1991, which, we cover a lot of that era on this channel, sort of coinciding with Wizard Magazine's run, with X-Men selling 8 million copies, with the rise of Image Comics, which even published Bone for a small time in the late 90s. But this is one of those unlikely success stories and a huge success.
Also, I mean, it benefits from just being something different on the racks.
Yes.
In many, many ways, man. It was the only kind of all ages sort of comic that would have been coming out when the zeitgeist changed to, the Triple Extreme, Tony Hawk, Larry Clark Kids era of the 1990s. You know what I'm saying? This stuck out like a sore thumb. As a kid growing up in that era, I couldn't be caught dead with this kind of comic in 1991. I certainly saw it on the racks like as time progressed and was like, I'm fucking with Stephen Platt right now.
Right.
Like when I'm growing up, girls have cooties, and when I'm like 12 years old, I can't be caught. Like comics, that's one thing that you're getting caught with, man. I could justify Ghost Rider comics in middle school. Yeah, I could show dudes, look at this scarecrow-looking villain. Look at this, how many bullets are coming out of this dude's gun. I would have got thumped on so hard if I had Bone comics in school, or if like even a friend came over and saw me having these shits in my collection. That said, I do have an apology to make to Jeff Smith real quick, man.
Coming clean.
Because they were also very expensive early on. So here's another round of Eddie P. Young bootleg comics that when I started going to this like intramurals kind of art school, met people who had Bone comics, and you would see in Wizard like how revered it was. So this is like my sly, like I would never spend $1 on it at this time. I went back, bought all this shit. Jeff, I got this thing. Now we're going to talk about that in a second. But early on, it's like, make my little bootleg Xeroxes at Office Depot.
This is a little bit later issues than what we're going to look at.
No, it's not. It's going to be in either 5 or 6.
Yeah, you're right, 5. This is such prime. Like, I feel like at this point he has hit his stride.
Yeah.
This is such a good period. So,
For sure.
yes, this is a fun era, definitely.
And can we say one other piece, man? Like, like the Bible is sort of like the ultimate edition to me.
Speaking of Bibles, this is printed by book publishers that print Bibles because of the page count and like the thin paper and stuff in order to get over 1,000 pages in a nice bound copy. This is an incredible book, just as a book, as a production piece.
Let's talk about Scholastic for 2 seconds, man, because this is where, I mean, he said it on the record.
I should say 55 issues. The entire series in one volume is what this is that we're pointing at here.
Right. He said, and it's on the record, it's public. He was like, "Scholastic made me rich." He said, because he and Vijaya, his wife and partner, are handling cartoon books. Like, in effect, she's cartoon books. She's handling all that stuff. So this dude could be 100% creative. She's handling distribution, calls to Steve Jeppy and shit like this, man. Licensing stuff. When Scholastic comes a calling, they could kind of sit back. The work is done. Maybe you call up Steve Haymaker, color this for me, however that gimmick works. But in the conversations with Scholastic, he was talking about he wanted this Ultimate Edition, and this is how big Scholastic is. It was a conversation, and they were like, how many copies of this big Bible thing do you sell? I got mine super new, and it's already like a 5th or 6th printing.
Yes.
And Jeff Smith and Vijaya were like, well, right now about 250,000 copies. And they were like, oh, go ahead. Yeah, you published that yourself. Don't worry about that.
That's a staggering number.
That's how big.
For a book that's, I don't know, $70, $40 for this book. And 6 figures in sales.
And that's how big Scholastic is, man, because they were like, we can't even bother with something that's as small as 250,000. Like, we have bigger fish to fry.
This is a fascinating comic for all those reasons and many more that we'll get into. We could talk about all the stuff outside of the actual craft of the comic and the story and the characters that Jeff has crafted in its success. Like, when we were going through those wizards, you'd start to see Bone popping up in, mentions here and there, and eventually like a Palmer's Picks kind of spotlight, and then a featured artist. And we wondered, like, what tipped that? Early on, I think around year 2 maybe, there's a color run in Disney's newsstand magazine. It used to see like a little kind of digest-sized Disney color magazine that you could get at the supermarket.
At the cash wrap section, like you could not escape it. It was when Mom is checking out, putting stuff on the conveyor belt, like staring you in the face is Disney magazine. And
something like 1 million plus circulation on that. And we think that's probably one of the big moments for Bone whenever it really crosses over and starts to gain a massive, massive following around that time. But you can see, like, this is a very late printing, so the pages are white. But for the most part, it's this humble newsprint kind of production in these single issues. So starting out, like we said, as a self-published, Cartoon Books Smith's company, pretty humble beginnings. A black and white book, no bells and whistles here. It is just straightforward comics for the sake of comics. And the strength of Bone lies in its characters, in its story, and in Jeff Smith's very charming cartooning.
Shot in the arm for black and white self-publishing as well, because as the success of this starts to grow, it creates another retail resurgence of, we better order at least a couple copies of every #1 self-published comic that's going to come out. So there's that resurgence. There's Roar and Rick's Rarebit Fiends, and The Distant Soils coming out again. Don Simpson's Bizarre Heroes.
Paul Pope's self-publishing efforts, Steve Bissett's Tyrant. They're all kind of this time period. They even would get together and tour as the Spirits of Independence for a couple of years. And I think in some ways that tour leads to like SPX, becoming this Celebrate Independent Self-Published Comics Festival. So incredible. Some of it's probably riding a wave of this is what's going on, and some of it is probably led by Jeff Smith and Bone and its success. And the last piece that I mentioned before we dive in here is the way Jeff sold this. He really worked to sell this. He had done this strip in college in the early 80s at Ohio State, Then he goes off and does animation for 10 years at his own company and comes back to this. And at that point, he's all in. Like, he's running this like a business. And he would go to those retailer summits and distribution summits for comics and just talk to comic retailers, hard sell these to comic retailers the way, cartoonists often do at conventions to individual readers. He was doing this to store owners and just really running this like a businessman.
If more cartoonists did that, we'd have just a bigger culture, bigger industry, a lot of masturbation in the comics game. Everybody thinking the fiction of the craft is what's going to save you. Not the case, man. You gotta put it in front of people's faces.
Ed, are we ready to dive in here?
I think we're in about 10 minutes into the conversation, man. Let's check out the actual artistry of the guy's work, because off the bat, you could tell that the guy's kind of a master cartoonist, man. Amazing compositions we're going to see throughout. One of the great black and white illustrators in comics. One of the few. There might be 10 people that you can cite as being like the true great black and white ink slingers, and Jeff Smith is in that conversation.
Yeah, and some of those aesthetic differences, you were comparing him to, say, a Stephen Platt. You see much cleaner work. He's coming from animation background. Walt Kelly and Pogo is one of his influences that he's talked about a lot. I think Carl Barks is another one. But you can see it in the art and the storytelling. It's just completely a different approach than 1991, 1992, we're talking Image Comics. So imagine Scott Williams hatching, compared to this kind of very clean style.
Absolutely, man. And, you could see the kind of Pogo type character, like that
Smiley Bone
character is kind of like the alligator or whatever. Phony Bone, a little bit of the Uncle Scrooge gimmick.
Yes. And these are Phony Bone,
Smiley Bone,
and then Phone Bone, our main character. Basically, they're cousins, and they've been kicked out of Boneville because of Phony Bone.
Yeah, doing some kind of, shenanigans.
Some kind of Uncle Scrooge cash grab and getting the ire of the other Bones. And so the story starts with them exiled and lost in the wilderness, so to speak.
We're going through the first, 5-6 issues?
Yes, first 6 issues.
And a lot of stuff happens in every issue. We're introduced to a lot of new things every issue, and this is the issue we're going to separate our guys, man. Like that's Lord of the Rings. Tolkien is a part of
Yes.
Bone as well, so you got to separate your protagonists and put them on their own separate adventures, marry them back up, and we're going to see all of that play out in this issue. How do we separate them? How about a swarm of locusts?
Yeah, it's great because you get just enough introduction to kind of identify their personalities and their dynamics before suddenly there's calamity in their path. And as you say, Ed, this is the locusts are the key to breaking up this merry gang, and you can see them coming in very horrific. And you see that animation style where these characters really are moving across the pages. Kind of fun to read, as a comics fan. This kind of movement, it's delightful.
That's when you say animation style, like this little sequence right there, like it's perfect storyboards. These are key frames that Jeff would have an in-betweener do the pencil pieces to match up those sequences, man. But even these kind of fine lines you just feel a poof of him landing on that dirt. And we've spent time with Jeff Smith and Vijaya, and they're unapologetic. He calls himself cartoon heads. They love I don't know about Terry Toons, Looney Tunes,
Sure,
Warner Brothers, Disney. They come from that pedigree, so they're not faking. This isn't a fake kind. It's super authentic for his tastes and sensibilities.
Ed, you mentioned about things happening pretty quick, and lots happens in each issue. So we've had a couple of pages of intro of characters, a couple of pages of running from these locusts, and now before Phone can even do anything, we have another element introduced here when these eyes open up in this dark cavern. You can see how readers are going to respond to something like this. It's very adventure based, where it's like, oh man, here comes the next piece, the next character, the next threat. I want to know who those eyes belong to. The
cleanliness of like not touching these lines. Like he came from animation and so comics is relatively new. I mean, he did the university strip and stuff, but it's just smart illustration in every panel. Beautiful compositions.
Yeah.
Like you could feel the daily strip vibe. Charles Schultz would do this sort of thing where you just give a hint of background. this beat for beat storytelling is bliss in these Jeff Smith comics to me.
Yeah, all the settings are very sharp. As we go through these 6 issues, you're going to see a variety of landscapes that they get into, and they're kind of an unsung hero of this book as far as I'm concerned, because it really gives you that sense of being in this new land, that sense of adventure and travel.
Amazing compositions.
That's beautiful.
And even this kind of thing, like what is that? Like, 2 together, we kind of could recognize that. We see a dialogue balloon, and then,
I love this kind of stuff because this is when you're a little kid. These are eyes, the reflection of eyes in the darkness, as you're shining a flashlight into the woods or something at night, camping, hiking, any of this kind of stuff. It feels like it's that, almost like that universal little kid fear, right? Fear of the dark. And now we've got eyes peeking out at us. It's easy to understand in that regard. You don't need any big experience as a comics reader. It's very clear what's happening.
Nice big bold line on our main character. Soften it up with the background images. In animation, the background would be kind of watercolor, no black holding lines. So he's figuring out ways to sell you on the focal point.
Also, great lighting.
Really great.
He plays really well with nighttime scenes, daytime scenes, and you can see it. Like, man, he's been out in the desert now for a while. You can almost see it in those heavy shadows underneath Bone as he's walking.
Great acting. And just breaking up the shapes with the white and the black layered on top of one another. Honestly,
there's a lot of silly moments like this too, like little physical comedy almost.
Yeah. Toth comes to mind a lot to me while looking through this in terms of composition and clarity.
Really great. He's got to keep moving. Pretty good with the dialogue so that we understand what we need to in terms of this is a struggle. This is not a good day for Bone.
That's another thing, dude. Incredible lettering. Really great lettering, man. Never abiding by just using one Ames guide for the lettering. You got all sorts of playful, big fonts at play on every page. It just breaks up the design of the page in a real nice way.
It's probably the least interesting thing to anyone watching, but I note how these balloons are organically shaped.
Yeah.
He's not using a template, so the balloons kind of fit with the overall drawing style. And there's expressive, like let's make that balloon expressive. Whenever he almost steps on Ted the bug, Ted's got to yell. So put some spikes around the edge of that.
What's real fun? Like, you could tell even from this issue that there's not a profit. This is a pure kind of comic, like profit motive in as much as like let's not lose our shirt on this. But what is Bone doing? He's following a trail of cigars, and in 1991 it wasn't Mad Men era. We knew that cigarettes and shit kill you. Like, they were in the news. There was all this like Joe Camel is bad. We got to get cartoony imagery away from cigarettes and all that sort of stuff. It's in here with no thought about that shit. It's just like, it's in there because they wanted to put it in there. When we did the shoot interview with him, well, it might have just been another conversation when he said that Scholastic was interested, and when he and Vijaya went to the offices to discuss the comic, they had kind of like we do with the Post-it notes, like they had pages marked, and it was like 100 pages, and they were like, no, like you should show us your like 5 big ones and we'll see if it's possible, but it might not be. Take it or leave it kind of thing.
That's so funny.
And you can imagine it's this kind of stuff.
It's interesting that would be. I'm glad you pointed out the cigars, because part of what makes this book so good is there are scary moments. It does feel like characters are at risk. It feels like maybe they won't all survive, and some of that comes from something like you have a cigar in an all ages book where you would never do that now. Disney would never, right? No, even Wolverine can't smoke anymore. He can kill people, but he can't smoke. But you have that. It adds a certain air of like anything goes, you know, and that's scary when you're reading it for a kid, even without it having to be scary. It's just that signal of like, this is not the safe world of, Wolverine.
There's several things.
I love these backgrounds, by the way. This fine pen line for distant backgrounds. Kind of one more example of Smith's acumen as a visual artist.
When we introduce Thorn, there's going to be, a sex component. There's nudity, kind of. Like, you don't see it, but, she's taking off her gear. Like, you see her naked leg and stuff. And then the thing that gets the Bones kicked out of town, it's shit humor. It's prunes, and it's literally scaring the shit out of the townspeople, and they kick the Bones out. So it's not for babies, Like, this isn't baby food comics.
This is Ted the Bug's older brother shows up, and I love this part because it shows the Whimsy. This whole time he's huge, and then whenever he turns to leave, you get the silhouette, and it's just this skinny, like, leaf-like style bug.
There's a lot of great visual jokes in here, and there's, just the way certain things are drawn. When we see, I just gotta mention it because I might not pay attention to it when we get there, but like we'll see
Smiley Bone.
Working at the pub, and he's got an apron on, and the top of the apron doesn't touch his shoulders. It's kind of like arcing over, like like that St. Louis Bridge kind of thing, and that's just fun cartoony drawing. A nice little visual grace note.
These rat creatures are incredible designs.
They are.
We'll see them throughout, so we'll get probably a couple of better shots of them, but they have that real sense of menace. And there are cartoons from my childhood like that. I used to think that when I was really little and would see Tasmanian Devil, where it was like, that's just a scary thing. The rat creatures have that, and I think that they're, all the better for it. And then we wrap up this first issue with, there are warnings about winter coming.
Yes.
We wrap up the first issue with the first snowfall, and it's like a blanket falling on Bone, unsuspecting poor little Bone. Hilarious. That's such a funny visual for snow.
It's so good, man. And just even like little pieces like that are nice observational illustration.
And next is Thorn. Thorn is introduced in here by Ted the Bug whenever he tells Bone, go find Thorn. She can get some answers for you.
Yeah. That's the other thing Jeff Smith does that's really well. You could just start flipping the other thing. He sets things up really well, like in every issue. And new stuff gets introduced every issue. So this is Thorn. Another issue will be Grandma Bone.
It's a great
Grandma
cover.
Ben. The guy is just awesome. This is like harkens right back to like Dale Goldkey, Carl Barks covers and stuff. He could kind of do it all. This Jeff Smith character.
I'll note the difference in the two covers because I've heard retailers talk about cover design and being like frustrated whenever a book will have like the same colors, like on the logo and top of the book. So if you have them shelved, how a lot of stores shelve them, they're kind of indistinguishable. So pretty good showcase of just how different you can make your covers. 2 and 3, nobody's going to be confused that they might already have this one or this one if they're sitting next to each other on a shelf.
Right.
Very distinct. And this is a little bit of an older printing. That number 1 that I have, I don't even know what printing it is. It's from 94, but who knows? Maybe that's 10 printings in.
Yeah.
These early issues, they would be kept in print. It was store friendly that way. People don't want to start with issue 4, so make sure those early issues are available. And back in the days of many distributors, self-publishers could make a living this way. Because when a new issue would come out, you would get a bump on those previous issue orders so that the stores would have those sitting on their shelves. Kind of neat, that self-publishing and distribution history that Bone covers. I mean, it goes until 2004. It's a different comics industry whenever this series is wrapped up. All right, so we're in the valley, and this is the middle of winter, and Bone's adapting pretty well. Here comes one of his forest friends, this possum and her little ones, her litter.
Storytelling wise, it's a pretty smart choice because this is bi-monthly comic probably, like every 2 months it comes out, and about that amount of time transpires from issue 1 to this issue. Like he's living a life already.
Also, storytelling wise, look at how much is happening in these pages. From issue 1 to this, just the second issue, we've got like half a dozen characters in a panel running around and all doing different things. And especially with the baby possums that have all this energy, they're bouncing around and keeping him busy. He's going to babysit them for a little bit. And this is one of my favorite panels. Once mom leaves and the little baby possums are free to do their thing, they're just climbing on Bone. Like you can see him as this pushover nice guy.
Right.
And of course, kids, man, they take advantage.
Even from the start, like when the kids are introduced, they're kind of jerky. They're really good kid characters, like very honest to a fault, and They say what's on their mind, but they are possums. One that can't be lost on you when you think about the Walt Kelly influence and stuff. And then what do possums do? They play dead. So
hilarious.
He scares them, and then they just kill over.
It's very natural. All that interaction is great. And the other thing that possums or little kids do, they get in trouble. And in this case, they go running outside into this forest. And again, a very natural thing for all of these characters. But we have our problems now. And Bone has lost Miss Possum's children. And of course, the rat creatures have found them.
Yes.
It could go no other way.
Yeah, I don't think we established the relationship between them and Bone in the first one. Did they see one another in that first issue?
They did, yeah.
Okay.
They did enough to scare Bone, and of course they lurk around the valley, so they're going to be a somewhat constant presence or always a threat, a possible threat. And that's where you get to see them, man. How great. When they're at their scariest, they're incredible designs. Their hands and feet are really well drawn too. I think it's a cool contrast between the monsters versus the Bone characters that are so simple. I've heard people talk about part of the attraction to the Bone characters, that simplicity, is in animation, bones are sort of like your structure. And it's almost what these Bone characters are. They're sort of like that, the simplest component for drawing. And so a lot of times people can relate to that. Like if you did doodles of little characters, they might look like bones.
Yeah, it makes you think about that Scott McCloud thing where they simplify the faces and you break it down to the smiley face.
So this is a super exciting page for me, Ed. I don't know if you remember this or not. Early 2000s, our local university, Carnegie Mellon, had a giant comic book show that had, over 100 different pieces of original art from different cartoonists. And they had Jeff Smith page, and it was this page. And I remember just staring at that thing because it's gorgeous in person. Waterfall impossible to draw. He makes it look easy. But then all the animation motion, right, of Bone running from these rat creatures onto this little branch. And of course, the rat creatures, the stupid rat creatures follow him out there. I just stared at this page in real life. Do you remember that page?
I do, yes.
Really cool stuff. You get the physics of that branch weighing down. It's all those little details that we say he's an animator, so he gets it. But I'm sure there are a lot of animators that don't get it. It's just really good observational kind of stuff.
Bakshi was on the channel. He's like, listen, man, you got some guys that can't draw so well, man. You let them do the walk cycle or something.
So funny, too, tumbling into the water. It's almost the sequence from Predator. Arnold Schwarzenegger going in the water and washing out, climbing up on the shore.
And this is the spatial relationship stuff. You establish a big foreground character and you create depth by just decreasing the size of your secondary objects.
Yeah, fairly straightforward. And at this point, Bone hurts his ankle and he's kind of dead to rights, man. Those rat creatures are on him whenever we get to see the dragon once again.
That is a device that will work on me forever when it comes to watching a story unfold, man. The hurt ankle is great stakes, man. It's a great kind of impediment. When Omar jumps out the window in The Wire, he's no longer the superhero. He's messed up. I watched this flick called Eden Lake where these terrible teenagers are chasing this couple through the woods. This lady twists her ankle, steps on a nail, all this, and it's just increasing creating every opportunity to slow our characters down and allow the possibility for danger to take place upon them.
And Smith sells it so well. Even the trip at the end of the page to set up the cliffhanger page ending of uh-oh, he's injured and there are rat creatures in pursuit.
You never see this, dude, where the composition goes across the spread like that, and it's not a 2-page spread. I've never seen that done before.
I haven't either. It's kind of brilliant. Middle of the spread too. Yeah, that's really interesting to see the dragon stretched out across those panels. Ed, you pointed out, I think it was Jaime that said, you do your 6-panel grid, don't have the gutters all in line. You see that? To me, that's that animator eye too, because I associate that with things like Carl Barks, Disney comics,
John Stanley.
Yeah, it's just it keeps you reading horizontally. I don't know. It's interesting because I do the 6-panel grid as well. That is all lined. Kirby would do the 6-panel grid all lined up. I'm not against that, but I do think it creates a little bit of a very horizontal movement.
I think it takes away it changes the rhythm, so it's not just the regular syncopation. And when you get the boxy standard Kirby 6-panel grid or the Ditko 9-panel grid, you run the risk, if you're not Kirby or Ditko, of creating a kind of white noise rhythm where people kind of take it for granted and maybe don't even pay as much attention as they should be to things. You break it up, changes the rhythm a touch, keeps people engaged. My theory.
Interesting lettering for a sound effect. It's not that big bubbly lettering that you often see, which is great. Develop your own language for all of these things.
Yeah, and you know what? He does that so well throughout this whole thing. He completely, he has his style, and he makes it work with everything in that world.
So, happy ending. The possums were reunited with their mother. By the time they get there, the dragon, of course, is long gone. Bone's telling them about his experience, and the mother's laughing at, what a good storyteller, always entertaining the kids. Meanwhile, his face is like third-degree burns, but nobody puts that part together. Nobody believes in the dragon except, he does because he keeps seeing him. But otherwise, that dragon is kind of a very mysterious force in this valley setting.
Interesting to keep the face kind of mangled, because you just never see that with cartoon characters. It's like the dragon would burn your face and then the next second you're fine. But it's a storytelling device here even, man. He's got to get that schmutz off his face, goes find some water. Guess what? He finds a girl too.
Love the water. Look at the hot springs are black against the snow. Great choice.
That's the other thing too, and you see it a lot with the rat creatures. Actually, there's a Mignola vibe to it. Not saying he's looking at that, but they share a certain sensibility of design and composition.
It's very strong, his black and white work. It always surprises me because I think the color bones look really good.
Yeah.
And it's, you talk about the small list of people who do really good black and white work in comics. It's an even tinier list that you can put color on that black and white work, and it looks good in black and white or in color.
Yeah.
Mignola being another good example of that. But he goes to get water and he meets Thorn.
When we introduce Thorn, now we're going to get to see Jeff Smith's emotional acumen or something. Like the way that he can draw this character act is sublime. It's incredible with a few brush strokes. The emotion he's able to convey in this character. You don't see good examples of it right here, but it's going to come up and it's going to be relentless.
What you do see here is these two panels showing like a Bone reaction and Thorn reaction, like comparing Bone and Thorn from a cartoonist standpoint. I think the contrast of those two approaches to cartooning, part of the magic of this series. Because it's the full range, but also putting those two types of different character designs next to each other and having them interact, that's something you don't see very often in anything.
This is the shit I'm talking about, man. So we have, this is a spread. She's putting her hand out to, to shake hands with him, make introductions. She's keeping her hand out. And as he's going, she's not exactly buying what he's selling. And you see her kind of like, she has this questioning look. And then this beautiful, like, pulling the hand back, like, taking the handshake away and looking
leaning
a little
forward to
suspiciously.
pulling back.
This is Disney quality animation here, man, with the emotion on this character's face. You take a look at any solitary Disney cell, it's a perfect illustration and full of emotion. Even the in-betweeners, and every like there's never a question what this girl's feeling.
Yeah, these 12 panels all capture that. If you just watch Bone through these 12 panels, you see him dancing around and trying to keep us entertained. The burnt Bone really reminds me of some of the Walt Kelly Pogo stuff.
There's a lot of little allusions, man. Certainly, the Miss Pogo, and I mean, Bone is Pogo.
So he's connected with Thorn, who's going to be kind of the spiritual guide of this series going forward. A huge development, and it gives us that, again, these character relationships, which, I don't know, that might be the heart of every great story, is having these strong characters that interact together. And now we've got that established. So Thorn will take us to the next part of this book as we get to meet more of these characters, and Bone starts to have a little bit more agency, like he's starting to find his way around this valley. And of course, what happened to his cousins? Well, let's find out. This is another fourth printing, by the way. So testament to how these things are selling. This is before there's enough to make a trade paperback, although at this point, fourth printing in, there probably is a trade paperback.
Yeah.
But you got to keep them in print, 6 issues, probably at least a year in a bi-monthly schedule, and then maybe another couple months before you get that first trade. And this is before trade paperbacks were even common. It's possible this is your prime format for a while.
There's all this back-end stuff, too, that is sort of worth noting when it comes to just even being a publisher and the way publishers are taxed at the end of the year with their inventory has to be treated like it's sold merchandise. So they have to... you don't want to overprint and have too many of them sitting in your warehouse space, man, because you're going to be taxed on that stuff. So, you do a 5,000 copy run here, sell that out, or get it down very low, and then do another 5,000. You never want to overprint too many of these things, certainly as an independent publisher.
I like the sleepy bone. He's waking up and he has like squinty eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, for quite a while. Then she's like, are you awake? And as soon as he realizes it's like Thorn, like he's there with Thorn, snaps to.
Yeah, talk about getting all the mileage you possibly could out of the simplest design. I don't know that you could simplify a character more than Bone is, and yet full range of expression is capable from him. From his face, from the whole body language. It's just, it's wild to see somebody do that.
All that said, I am waiting for the panel where he has to scratch the top of his head or something like that. Like, let me see how Jeff does that, because that's something I always think about with, Peanuts. Let me see you open a door, Charlie Brown. How does that work?
He's now staying with Thorn, and Thorn lives with her grandmother, who we're going to meet as well. It's going to be one of those giant characters in the Bone mythology. And everything's built up. Everything is foreshadowed. Whenever a new character is going to show up, we're almost always looking forward to it.
Right. More visual humor.
Yes, trying. He's going to go split wood because that's what he's the man. That's what he's supposed to do. Can't even move the axe. I always love that stuff where you get the weight of the character. It's funny how that kind of thing, it's again and again we'll see that, whether it's riding a cow or breaking a tree branch or not just hanging from an axe handle.
The dragon just showing up often. And you could imagine that, like, a little kid would latch onto something like this, man, because little kids have their imaginary friend or whatever, and mom and dad don't believe. Like, that's totally relatable to a child.
I like this panel. Thorn is enthralled by one of Bone's comic books. She's never seen a comic book before. She's so happy.
Got to get more comics into your comics, man.
Yes.
Stephen King has a writer in every novel.
Yeah, I love it. Comic book propaganda. Good stuff, Jeff.
More of these spreads. He's thinking for the spread. So it's like create a scene that stretches across the spread. Keep the camera fix focus. Let the characters act and do their thing.
I think this is the first mention of Moby Dick, which is, Bone's favorite book, and it kind of comes up throughout this series. That's a book that he goes back to again and again. So you get a little bit of that, and of course she falls asleep whenever he's telling her about it.
That's the joke.
Yes, very funny.
It's a running joke that's going to crop up, certainly in these 6 issues, that the second he starts talking about Moby Dick, puts everybody to sleep. Reminds me of my dad whenever he tells me about any movie he just watched recently. Can make Terminator 2 a good bedtime story, that guy.
Good characterization, though. It's one more chance to kind of see who this Bone character is and get a little bit of Thorn's reaction to it. And now we're going to cut to Phony and see what Phony's been up to this whole time. And you can see, talk about a different character and different disposition. A very unhappy guy.
It's in the body language with that hunch over, always the furrowed brow. And just to make sure that the dolts among the readers keep everything on track, let's put a little star shirt on him.
Yeah. You see him grump, growl. Those are, any of the sound effects remind me so much of Walt Kelly. And now we have Phony encountering our dragon. And the dragon's fun because he's kind of a Disney-esque dragon design. But we've seen what he can do, and now you have smoke coming out of the nostrils.
Yeah, it's so good.
Little subtle acting.
And little Ted the Bug, man, is like, hey, why don't you come over in this direction?
Ted the Bug is just great. It's a half circle. There's nothing to it.
I think there's a toy of it. I think in the statues and stuff. Like, I definitely know, like, Randy Bowen did, like, a big-ass dragon. But it might be on a little pedestal that has a little Ted the Bug carved into it.
Yeah, there's gotta be. How could you not do Ted the Bug?
Let's see Ted the Bug cosplay.
And Grandma Ben coming home from town with her cows.
Looking like Gabby Hayes or Robin Williams Popeye or something.
That's funny. Yeah, character that we've, again, started to hear about because of Thorn. She's going to be a massive character in this series. And I guess most of these characters that we meet in the first 6 issues are. This is the foundation for the whole 55 issues.
They have their arc. Everybody has their arc. There's no willy-nilly character that's there for sort of no reason. They all start off one way, end up a different way.
Yeah, and Grandma Ben's sort of this tough, no-nonsense. She's a farmer. I had a grandmother that was a farmer. They kind of tell it how it is, you know. You're not going to BS a farmer. And she, of course, runs into the BSer of the Bones. So they get off on the wrong foot while Thorn and Phone are quick friends. Grandma Ben's going to have a very different opinion of the Bones, having encountered Phony first. So Grandma Ben is home. And what happens? Phone Bone is the first one in. Instantly, the mood changes from being excited to meet Grandma to, uh-oh, something's not working. It's out of control. Of course, it's Phony Bone.
And Thorn is setting up for that. You know, she's baking Grandma her favorite pie and stuff to try to slide one past her.
Crazy old lady. Seems like the perfect summary for how Phony would describe her.
Right.
Her in that encounter with the cows. Racing Cows is like the next, I think that's the next story arc after issue 6. And like that's the one that is the artist edition. So probably the one that Jeff Smith feels really good about. And fans love, obviously. Very action set piece. And I think it's one that turned into a bigger story than he originally planned, which I think is part of the way this story was written. You know, he knew where it was going, but maybe not exactly great detail. I might not have been able to tell you it's going to be 55 issues at this stage. You know, it was sort of like, well, let's see what these characters do.
In interviews, he did mention always that the ending is mapped out. So it's like, we have point A, our Bones get kicked out of town. We have the end point. How do we get there? I don't know. But I'm going to have to stick my brush into a tennis ball to ink because I just did 1,000 pages and I need some relief.
Oh, man. And so the pie that Thorn baked for Grandma Ben, her favorite pie, first thing that happens is Phony Bone eats a slice, helps himself, and then the next thing is shove it in Phone's mouth to make it disappear.
That's a cool thing, man, because it's the first time we seen the charred face, but we never seen the character kind of off model. And sometimes in cartoons that's not in that cartoon's universe. You never see that in Flintstones or whatever. So they're establishing that, you know, you could do that.
And it's 100% visual gag.
Totally.
I like seeing the stuff in the comics where you see Dan Clowes would do this in 8-Ball, you know, where you're selling stuff.
Yeah.
It's your merch spread. And in the early days, man, you got to do something. You don't even have books yet to sell.
I mean, the shirt is one copy of the shirt is equivalent to probably 5 copies of the comic sold, you know? So it's like you got to have your swags.
You also have then people advertising for you. One of the great things I find is we're selling shirts with Cartoonist Kayfabe logos on them. It's incredible to see at a convention or something, people walking around with your show, your comic, your characters on it. Kind of nice, you know, a little bit of free advertising.
We did that Heroes Con.
Or I guess profitable advertising.
In 2019, we didn't have 10,000 subscribers and we saw 100 shirts. What's it going to look like if there are ever comic conventions?
When, Ed? When? All right. Issue number 4. Talk about menace. We've seen these rat creatures building up as being a problem whenever there's 2 of them. Great cover if you're reading the series.
Love the color on those eyes.
Yeah, this is a big one, man. Something is that's a scary cover.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the little farm in the middle of the woods. The Bones not getting along well with Grandma Ben.
Yeah, they got to stay out in a barn or whatever. Barn is drafty. Phony Bone, he's a thrifty guy, man. So he's going to take care of the things that ail him. He's going to take care of that draft, but it's going to cost Grandma Ben a pair of her bloomers.
That's another one of your
Yes.
the apron straps
Yes.
getting a little animated, popping up over.
I love that. It's just a nice visual thing to look at.
Oh, and speaking of Thorn and Phone Bone, you see the hearts around Bone's head whenever he's talking about Thorn. Somebody
Yeah.
has a crush.
Right.
Smith does that a lot with characters, things flying off their heads. Just on this spread alone, we see Grandma Ben a couple of times. We see Phony. Those cartoon, I forget the name of those, the cartoon marks, though, of like the sweats and, shorthand of these excited characters.
Right. On Grandma Ben, this is like, that's her spider sense. So we're getting a little introduction into her gitchy feeling.
Yeah, Gitchy's the word she uses for it.
Coming up to the Thorn nudity sequence. Getting ready. We're going to take a bath, man. Pulling her gimmicks up.
Yeah, that part's a little bit odd, that we romanticize her a little bit, and then, what's Bone?
Is it like Jeff Smith is putting that Swamp Thing, Abigail Arcane gimmick to the test, man.
Yeah, that's a good parallel.
He's one-upping it.
Phony Bone is always scheming.
Uh-huh.
He's probably equally a well done character for those reasons. It's easy to think of all these Thorns, Grandma Bens, and stuff, but Phony's villain isn't the right word. It's such a scumbag.
Yeah, it's a hacker. It's that entitlement. These people, man, who just if there's an established rule, they're gonna just figure out the way to bypass that to get even one step ahead of you, even if it brings calamity.
Yeah, that kind of stuff rings so true. Like you say, these people, and that's what makes comics storytelling work, is having that grain of truth.
Yes.
The being able to recognize in that character friends, or neighbors, people it really drives that home. And it's hopefully you don't know too many Phony Bones in your life. He's out doing his thing and he stumbles upon these rat creatures. So this is basically your transition into what's going on with the rat creatures, because first of all, he smells them, they stink. And then when somebody's coming, he dips away. But now we get to see King Doc, who is the more terrifying version of all of these rat creatures, and their leader, more teeth, bigger size. It's exactly what you would do to make a more menacing version of them.
When they talk about the smell, they look like what's like a petting zoo would smell or something.
They really do. It's almost matted fur. You could use a lot of this if you were doing a Sasquatch Yeti character. You could bring in a lot of this look. Also transitioning to nighttime, whenever those rat creatures are going to do their business and stir up their trouble, got to be at nighttime. Full moon zine, by the way. These mountains just barely remind me a little bit of King Cat. The way those mountains are shaped in the back, they often have the side views.
Crazy Cat.
Crazy Cat, yeah. King Cat, different comic.
Shouts to John P.
Yes. This is great. This is another part of the epic coming together, which is King Doc organizing all these rat creatures, and we're going to start to get just a glimpse of the history of this valley and the power balance between the humans, the dragons, and the rat creatures. But at this point, the rat creatures are planning a move, trying to make a power move here. And good job on Jeff Smith of making it feel like there are a million of these things.
Yeah, he's very good at that. Even that swarm of locusts in issue 1 had that energy.
I always like this character, the even more mysterious leader of this group, but the way the hood goes down over, I don't feel like he's looking down. I feel like that's just the way the hood is. It's completely draped over the head.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely, he's got the cartoonist's posture. I feel like
Yes.
when you see it like this, he's definitely got been drawn 1,000 pages, 20 hours a day kind of posture. But the other piece too that's easy to make note of that I always dug, and I've done versions of this, is the dialogue balloon, the tail kind of going in there.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Like the times when I would use it would be like you have a door half kicked open, and then somebody on the other side of the door in the other room is saying something. Have the tail go in there. Don't have it stop on the outside of the door and have that little burst like they do. Have it snake around, man.
Yeah, it's pretty fun storytelling. It's another one of those visual things you can do as the cartoonist. You don't see a lot of digital lettering. Whenever you see these comics that we point out with the computer lettering, you're not going to see a lot of this kind of thoughtful treatment of what can you do with those word balloons.
Yeah.
It does create a very menacing style character, though, that hood, that hunch, all those pieces. Really good with folds and drapery, too.
He is.
It sells that hood really well.
Yeah.
And here we go. This is basically your cover. This might even be the cover illustration. That character looks very much... A couple of changes, I guess. The starry background sky is different here. And a flashback. So we get to see, this is, I think, young Thorn, flashing back to maybe the early days of the war in this valley.
Could draw good kids.
Oh, I guess maybe Nightmare, not flashback. Although
Right.
I think it's both, right? She has some connection to those early days.
Yeah.
But wake up because we are surrounded, the farm is surrounded by rat creatures.
Now we're going to get to see...
And next issue, trapped.
We're going to get to see what Grandma Ben could do, man.
Stan Sakai.
Jumps out at me.
Letter here. There's, as you read like the letters columns in here, a lot of people weigh in on very complimentary.
On an indie comic, man, it would be real dumb to put the promo cut letters in there, man. You could do that on the Spider-Man when a letter writer is talking shit, but real stupid to do if you're doing it on your own indie book.
Yeah, I wonder how many people are taking time to read Bone and then write off a dismissive letter. I feel like that's usually your Spider-Man like entitlement of Spider-Man's my character. How dare you give him extra arms?
It is comics, so I could never put it past
Probably a
goofball.
couple. Constructive criticism, no doubt.
Right.
All right, issue 5. Grandma Ben gets to... We're going to see what she's made of now.
Exactly.
Doing her best Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rambo kind of impression here.
She's got those arms, man.
She's great, too, because, like, what are you going to do? You're surrounded by rat creatures, but it's not like you have any options. You sort of have
defensive. They are the tigers in the corner.
got to take a stand. And her plan is she's going to just start fighting, and when she says run, the kids in Bone take off.
This kind of stuff. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It begs to be animated.
This whole... I love this sequence of the winding up and then punching forward.
Totally. Through the wall, through the panel gutter.
This is like Ivan Brunetti talks about have your characters the same size and they're almost animated between panels. That's exactly what you see here.
And we've seen a dozen examples, if not 3 dozen examples throughout this first couple of issues already.
Also good at getting some exposition into like an action scene where I fought the rats back in the big war. So we get some reference about the history of this valley and who's who in that history.
Right.
So they take off, they start to make their run, and as they're running along, and this is that sequence that we saw your bootleg version in the beginning, it's masterful stuff, them running.
This is the stuff that's like, it's Toth. It's incredible composition. It's incredible use of black and white.
Very dynamic. I love the jumping over the branches.
Such
falling.
energy to it.
It's impressive to me that he can do these kind of panels where you can read the action that's happening, right? They're like tumbling down this hill, rat creatures are chasing them, and there's nothing there. It's just a couple of white marks to indicate leaves being rustled up as they fall.
There's this bit that we talk about in art school, man, of what they would call Gestalt theory, and it's tying panels together visually, and it's such a thin line between tangent and Gestalt theory. So like we see the curve of her right here. It's Gestalt theory because this curve kind of continues
Right.
here, but if it would be a tangent if this curve touched the edge of that panel. So you break it up with that tree and add space, and then it just creates this flowing motion from one panel to the next.
I've never heard it called that Gestalt theory. I would always think of this as like a motion device, like leading your eye across the page.
That's what it is. That's just foo-foo talk for what you described.
And we mentioned Carl Barks a couple of times. It's one of the things that I think he is known for, is having that kind of great page design of leading your eye with these, motion devices, lines, or whatever is necessary, but makes the reading part really easy. It's almost like when you finish a panel, you are ready for that. You're aimed at that next piece. It just flows.
Yeah, it's a very dicey thing to talk about, because when it would be discussed, now the next assignment that everybody's turning in, full of tangents, because we're trying to, punch above our weight class and stuff. So use sparingly.
Right. Nice page, because in the center, we have the revelation of like, there's too many. Grandma Ben didn't realize the woods were full of these monsters. She needs our help. Using Bone as a weapon.
For an object, man. He's a steel chair.
Even in the middle, Jeff Smith finds ways to be funny and keep us engaged.
What you got to do, man, with this.
You really do. It's what so many cartoonists don't do, where it's like, you'll see cartoonists that are extremely good draftsmen, and yet I'm not interested. Right. And it's because they don't have those moments, or it's everything's a 10 the whole way through, and it's like, you got to change up some stuff. I love that Thorne carries Bone, where it's like, okay, we're going back. Let me tuck you under my arm like a football. And
listen, man, your gait is a little slow, man. Like every one step of my human legs, man, is about 5 steps of your little tiny bone feet, and we gotta get somewhere. Can't be playing around.
And these two are now surrounded. It's almost like they've drawn their monsters away from. It's almost like the monsters are after Thorne or Bone, and then. Let's cut at a tense moment. Let's cut away from that action and go to Barrowhaven's pub, where Phony has now wandered into the bar because he's heard about this upcoming cow race, and there's a lot of gambling on it. He believes he can take some money.
We've been calling him Funny Bone, and it felt wrong the entire time. His name's
Smiley.
Smiley Bone.
Yeah. Wonder if we'll get any comments about that.
Oh, I'm sure we will.
All right, so Smiley, we finally see him again for the first time since issue 1. Reunited, he's working the bar here, and before too long, the real owner of the bar shows up, and of course, does not like Phony.
Yeah, I mean...
Mostly because he can't pay for the beer he's drinking.
We established Thorne and Grandma Ben as like these human characters, and then it's like, no, the Bones are the oddballs out. Like, this is a world of humans.
Right. Except for this guy who happens to be Strong Guy's cousin.
Absolutely, man, with that little gimmick on his head. Listen, man, going bald, not a choice. Being bald is a choice. Shave that shit.
He really would fit next to the Strong Guy.
Yeah, he absolutely would.
Even
man.
with that little strand of forehead hair.
Could be Guido's dad, but I do suspect that he's a ginger for some reason. I don't think I ever saw him colored, but I can imagine that being red.
He's a fun character design. That hunched over back, and I'm impressed that Smith is able to draw both these cartoon characters, but then also when he draws a human, it's almost always really good.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, when he does that Captain Marvel Shazam comic, you get to see a lot of examples of that, him playing with the human figure a little bit more.
All right, cut back to the action, cut back to the nighttime, the darkness out in the forest, and Bone and Thorne in a lot of trouble.
Very few dialogue balloons between our scared characters where he's abiding by his typical Ames Guide setting. These characters are freaked out. They're screaming. They're panicking.
I thought you were going to go a different direction and say very few panels of them dialogue in this tense situation, which, think of Stan Lee filling up a fight scene where it's like, well, that's, 43 seconds to read the back and forth in this punch.
Right.
A lot more tense of like, they're just running, like time is moving really fast here. Good manipulation of that. But we've learned here, these rat creatures are after Bone. Yeah,
because, well, I guess we'll figure out, like, he awakened the dragon. I think that Grim Reaper character talked about that during his little piece, man. He woke in the dragon, Clifford the Big Red Dragon, and here it is.
Yeah, and as things look the most grim, Bone smells brimstone, and that can only mean the dragon is nearby.
Another little appearance from our favorite cosplayer. Cosplay costume. Ted the Bug.
Yeah, good stuff. Speaking of good stuff, the terrifying rat creature about to pounce. Man, that's... Maybe Jeff Smith should have done a Venom book. It's pretty strong.
Great piece of comedy as the rat creatures kind of like approach our dude. We see this guy get all up and he's got bluster. He's got piss and vinegar in his veins, man. And he's going to get up in his grill, start shouting at him. Comrades, let's kill the dragon. Looks back, cocks that neck back. He's Frank the Tank in old school, man. He's on an island unto himself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And you see him recoil back hissing.
Yeah.
I have cats. I know what this is like.
Right.
It's pretty good creature body language. And now Thorn has to accept that there's a dragon. I love the dragon now racing back to the farm, and we see motion lines on the trees as the dragon's moving, and the dragon's ears are back.
Her hair is back. Really sells that motion.
Bone can't even hold on. Pretty good. I once saw guys at a stop sign, and there were two dudes on a motorcycle, and whenever the guy starts up, the dude on the back fell off on his ass in the middle of the road. It's this exact moment. If you didn't have the big back of the dragon to catch you. And they get back to the farm in time to see that they're too late, and the farm's kind of destroyed.
Luke Skywalker going back to the moisture farm. Oh, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru are in there.
Yeah, I thought you were going to look at me to pull those names out. It was not ever going to happen.
I was about to call him Uncle Ben.
Scott McCloud leading off our letter hacks this issue. Pretty good. And now think about this for a second. This is the end of issue 5, which would be the arc is the first 6 issues. This is a great ending for, what's going to be like the penultimate issue for this first storyline. And we see a lot of destruction and possibly death. Till you see the cover of issue 6.
And he's not a ginger.
Oh, no, he's not. Boy, he is tan, though.
He really is, man. They spend a lot of time out in the sun.
That's so funny. Like, if all you see is the musculature of this arm, it could be like rank Xerox or something.
Look at that Gabby Hayes mouth on old Grandma Ben, boy.
That's fantastic. By the way, those mouths, those chins, these two could be brother and sister.
And you know what? In this valley, maybe all bets are off.
Could be. This is still a third printing, by the way. Issue 6, all the way into, deep into multiple printings.
You would see that Wizard magazine, like the Bone section, there's 10 issues out, but it takes up half a page.
Shades of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
yes,
talking
exactly.
about the creator-owned books and independently self-published books. Like, it's a short list that is at the top of that list. It's very select company. Hall of Famers, all of them. So, racing back, we pick up right where the last issue leaves off, racing back to the farm, to the destroyed farm, and thankfully, Grandma Ben comes walking out, head wrapped up, really doing the John Rambo with the headband.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, you could imagine that this is just a canvas burlap sack that she's wrapped herself up around and that she found while out there. More beautiful acting, Disney quality, perfect drawing right there.
Yeah, that whole page is just a great page. Built around several of those standout panels.
And Grandma Ben, she's no selling the dragon, man. They have history.
Yeah, it's great. You get one moment of like granddaughter and grandmother hugging, and now it is back to business. It's glad I survived. We celebrated that for a panel. Let's get this show on the road.
Hello, Rose, man. He knows her by a name that everybody else don't know her by.
Yeah, a little bit of another one of those revelations. Wow.
Makes you wonder just like how much Jeff Smith kind of mapped out early to kind of fit all this stuff in there.
It's one of the great parts of the storytelling to me. He had to have a clear idea, like we said, of an overall arc who's who, what their history is, and then you get to reference that and you get to see it in these little glimpses.
Yeah, but
I always said with X-Men, it would be like, when I started reading X-Men, it's like you're looking out a window to get a glimpse of this world, and then you get to look out another window, and pretty soon you're getting a picture of it. It feels like that's good storytelling, and that's what's happening here.
Yeah. The difference with this though is I think it is like truly planned out to a certain extent. I think X-Men and stuff is like, my name's Chris Claremont. I got this monthly gig, and now I got to keep it rocking, and that machine is churning. So I just got to keep spinning plates for 17 years, man. But it seems like this is comics done with a purpose.
So I love this askew panel as the dragon wanders off, and the mass of the dragon is really fun. That's a unique
good
body type. Good white-black values as he's wandering back into the forest, and you see the darkness against his light-colored body. And now Grandma turns to Mr. Bone. They need to have a little chat. All of this activity with dragons and rat creatures is not normal valley activity. And smart Grandma Ben identifies there's something new in the valley and all this trouble starts. I think those things are connected. Starting to hear a little bit about Phony's troubles in Boneville.
This is a great drawing because you have the incline of the kind of ramp, and then you have like the flat perspective here, but this is on the perspective with all of this with the ramp and the shadows going down the ramp. Like, that's not an easy drawing to do.
It calls to mind for me Alex Ross's Kingdom Come whenever Old Man Superman is carrying his tractor into the barn. So it's the same sort of scenario. He's going in while they're coming out, but it's really clumsy where it's almost like the tractor's bumping the barn.
Right.
I remember it distinctly for some reason. It might have been a profile piece of art for in Wizard or something, but I remember looking at it and being like, it's that tangent that you can't really have. It's not right. This doesn't have those problems.
No.
I also love that they use cows instead of horses. Like hook the cart up to a cow.
Yeah. They're selling all like the wooden wheels and like just everything feels organic.
Another great example of his character design. Here are the cows from behind. Square hip bones, very distinct, very clear. Super contrast to the rounded mass of your dragon walking away.
Yeah, I was thinking about the dragon. It's probably like an elephant structure. Like, look at the back of an elephant or something. For that, like, look at that little dew claw.
Yeah, very small details that sell it. Horse even has the different shape. When we finally see a horse, you're not going to mistake that horse for one of the cows.
Exactly. Aren't thatched roofs, like, just the biggest bitch in the universe to draw, Jimmy?
I haven't drawn a lot of thatched roofs, Ed.
Jeff Smith handles it, man.
Yeah, it gives it a very good rustic look. Same with the barrels. I think the barrels would be a little bit challenging to make those look good. I have drawn a bunch of garbage cans, which is kind of similar.
All of this stuff, it always makes you wonder, and I think about it in Cerebus comics and stuff, like all of this kind of like Ren Fair architecture and stuff, like what's the reference that you have on hand for these kinds of things? I just don't know.
Yeah, all that, I guess, Tudor architecture or something.
Yeah, it definitely ain't photographs.
The black and white, I think the black silhouette of your trees in the foreground, it's, again, subtle, but it's one more example of his ability to do black and white art really well.
Yeah.
To create depth where there almost isn't any. And this is something we've talked about with Mike Mignola. You look at the background, and he's using black again to recede. This time it's the negative space around the tree rather than the tree that's in the foreground. And we have the two Bone cousins plotting how they're going to benefit from the upcoming cow race, and it involves some sort of a cow costume that they're putting together.
Yeah, and Phony Bone, because he's the money man, he's going to be the bookie. Like, he's going to start taking bets, and he's going to try to throw that shit like Villanova basketball.
Should point out now both of the Bones are working at this tavern as they've been drinking without any means to pay for those drinks.
Got to work off that
washing dishes. And our weird Grim Reaper character shows up. This is, I guess, the Bone that he's looking for, right? The character with the star on the chest.
Right.
Pretty creepy to have this sighting in the daylight. and he's nowhere to be seen. Phony's wondering if he's losing his mind, if he's imagining stuff. Love the anticipation for the cow race. Mm-hmm. You have the Bones at the tavern making their plans. Now you have Grandma Ben showing up, coming into town early. We've heard Thorne talk about it. It's great foreshadowing, setting this stuff up, making you want to keep reading. I don't see that as much in comics.
Right.
I don't know if that's a part of the serialized nature of this. It feels like it works as a collection, too. Whenever you read this all as one big story, it works really well. So something we could all maybe do a little bit more of. You always hear, like, if you're going to write an essay or something, it's like, say what you're going to say it, and then say what you just said.
Right.
There's a little bit of that in here. And, of course, Ben and our tavern owner, they're longtime friends. And both mistrusting of the Bones.
There's our cover image. What? Hold up.
Did I skip it?
Oh, yeah, there it is.
And there's our Grim Reaper. Very subtly, almost blending in with the trees as he's watching this whole thing unfold.
Totally great piece.
And Ben and Lucius talk a little bit about what's going on, because things are definitely different in this valley. Something has changed, and obviously it's our heroes, the Bones. And one more little tiny visual gag to wrap up this panel of shaking Phony. It's so small you can barely see it, but pretty fun drawing. Lots of eyeballs bulging out of Phony's head as Phone Bone is choking him and shaking him.
The gang's all back together, though.
Yes.
Like we start off issue 1, we separate our dudes. It creates the opportunity to flesh out a little bit of the universe of, like, this valley where they're at, all of that stuff. We end the first book with the characters all back together. A nice, solid little arc.
Yeah, well said. A couple standout letters in here is Charles Vess, Bill Ray, at the time Ren and Stimpy, working on Ren and Stimpy show. You know what? There's also a letter in here from Indiana, PA, where I went to school, probably around the time that this third printing is out. They had a really good comic book store there that closed while I was there, one of the casualties of that late 90s, implosion of comics. But there you go. The first arc of Bone is complete. Probably would have been about a year. I think he maintained a pretty good bi-monthly schedule early on. So the first year of Bone, as you said, Ed, kind of setting up all the players, getting them all together through a baptism of fire, literally sometimes with their dragon. Pretty fantastic. You know, it's a foundation for what goes on to be this epic fantasy story. You compared it to Lord of the Rings, not the first person to do that. And Jeff Smith just burst onto this, year 1 of Jeff Smith, Cartoonist. Man, he was big by the end of this year. By the time these 6 issues came out, Bone was known. It was kind of this recognized, respected, new comic on the scene.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, like, what's the final analysis, man? Winner of 11 Harvey Awards, 10 Eisner Awards, including Best Cartoonist, Best Humor Publication, Best Comic Book.
Yeah, that sums it up really well. A fantastic comic. Glad we had a chance to finally look at it. And it's nice because as different as it is from these early 90s books that we've been looking at, there is a lineage of this kind of comics storytelling, and it intersects in a lot of different ways from that self-publishing that's one lens to look at this through, but that history of things like the Carl Barks and the Walt Kellys and the Disney comics, it's a rich vein that just wasn't around for a while, and one of the few all-ages books that go through the 90s. At a time when comics kind of abandoned that young reader, Bone was the one that kept that alive, and in a huge way, because as we get into the 2000s and Scholastic starts publishing these, kick the door down of the bookstores, it's time for graphic novels.
Sure, yeah. Obviously I have no clue, all conjecture. Yeah, sure, it's an all-ages book, yada, yada, but I don't know one kid who's seeking out a black and white bi-monthly comic at the comic shop. This is perfect fodder for, like, the nostalgia people who were down with the Dale Goldkey, like, reprints of the Carl Barks stuff. the old heads that were messing around with that. Like in one of the issues, there was a letter from the guy from Gladstone Publishing. So this comic was juiced into that world. Like those, I forget the name of that one Wizard editor guy who like totally,
right.
but like I'm sure he was a devoted reader of this, and probably is the guy who got Wizard to cover it because of that nostalgic bend. But there's power in that, and that's a big audience. I mean, a big part of this frickin' channel is people revisiting the comics that they were messing with back, 20, 30 years ago. So he was able to kind of exploit that. But then it has those roots that work for all ages and everything, sans the cigar gimmick and whatnot. So when Scholastic comes a-calling, now you have the kid audience, man. And this shit was in those little RIF, reading is fundamental, checkbox things in homeroom class for generations. My sister, who doesn't give two shits about comics, like knows what Bone is because of those things. So
yeah, and I think
legacy.
its next piece is a Netflix show. So Bone may be bigger in 10 years than it is even at this point.
Feels evergreen. The other cool thing is, like, by rooting it in this kind of like Ren Fair setting, whatever you call that aesthetic, Zelda aesthetic, I guess Tolkien, right?
Yes, that's probably the right phrase. It's
evergreen. It's timeless. There's no, weird costumes that are dated, and you can accept all of it. So it's just from a business perspective, it's even smarter, like with the choices that were made.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, Ed. It was fun to reread this week.
Absolutely, man. And it's not like I'm going to stop reading it after reading
right.
this first one. So I got a lot of work to do with this, man. On top of Comics Drawn, you ready to get out?
I am.
Kayfabers, like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell. We'll notify you when new vids are available. Jimmy, what's out there?
Patreon.com/JimRugg is where you can find all of my latest work, lots of original art, lots of process behind the scenes kind of stuff, and out-of-print zines and mini comics that you can download. All of that at patreon.com/JimRugg.
Jimmy, this background is perfect to explain the juxtaposition. Like, this is all the stuff that was out on the stands when Bone was coming out.
It's very weird to think of it fitting in with this aesthetic, but you were right.
It's all this. This was coming out, a year after this came out.
I love, like, are these two opposite?
And you know what? We'll throw another one into the mix, man, because Red Room is coming out in May. Orders have to be in pretty soon. It's going to be a monthly comic, regular horror comics on a monthly basis with that hardcore outlaw energy, duotone, stark black and white. You could pre-order your comics, or depending on when you're checking out this video, you could order the comics directly through the Fantagraphics website at the link provided in my link tree in the description below. You can read the comics on my Patreon, also in that link tree.
You can subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video to keep up with everything we have going on and coming up in 2021. You can also find Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts and merchandise at the links below this video.
Jimmy, give him one more set of marching orders, man. We're going to be on our way.
Read more comics.